You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you by our brilliant sponsor, X-Deep, and by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, of all the disciplines associated with diving, photography and videography have always been special to me. The ability to capture that perfect moment underwater in often challenging conditions, dealing with lighting and composition, along with the technical requirements related to the camera in an underwater environment, is just amazing. And then add to that the dive skills to be stable in the water while seeking the shot. Now, personally, I love shooting GoPro video of my dives, clipping images, and then editing them into almost a video logbook of where I've been and dived, and then sharing them on the Sidemount Pros YouTube channel and on my Instagram and Facebook pages. But like anything, there's levels to this game, and in photography, to capture images that are worthy of magazine spreads or covers and to win awards against their peers is really the pinnacle. Now, there are many great photographers and videographers out there, and I've had a few on the show such as Laurent Miroult, Stratis Kas, Lehman, Natalie, Gibb, and Becky Kagan-Schott. Some have also added conservation and wildlife photography into their work, and my guest in this episode is very much in this vein. Ellen Cuylaerts hails from Belgium and is an award-winning photographer focused on ocean wildlife photography. She has a unique perspective on her work as she seeks to develop a deeper connection between humanity and nature through her images. Now, Ellen's also a cave diver and now an explorer. She was part of the all-female Schunnenhaar project under the tutelage of Robbie Schmidtner, my guest in episode 85. I've also done other episodes with Tamara May and Ramba Jurmensen. Now, as we talk of Ellen's diving and her work, we can't help but touch on the many challenges that she has faced, from being a mother to two high-functioning autistic children, to losing her partner to suicide, and a type 2 DCS incident that left her with paralysis. Now, through all of this, Ellen has shown extraordinary strength and resilience, and most strikingly, an amazingly positive attitude and outlook. She now applies this to her work and to her conservation efforts, where she's a leading speaker and voice for the environment. Sit back and enjoy my conversation with Ellen Cuylaerts in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. And we are recording. Hey, Ellen, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Hi, Steve. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your, how do I call it, channel, podcast? Podcast, yeah.
Awesome. Hey, amazing to have you on here. And would you believe, I think you're the third Belgian to be on here as well. We didn't mention that offline, but I don't know what it is about Belgium and diving, but you guys are doing some amazing stuff. And you and I have known of each other for quite some time. You're obviously a world-renowned photographer specializing in ocean conservation and ocean photography. And I'd love to talk some more about that. But to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into diving?
It's actually a long story, but I try to keep it short. I was born and raised in Belgium. Since I was 13, I wanted to become a photographer, and I got my first Nikon, but I didn't realize it was only the body that I bought. Development and lenses was very expensive, so that camera is still gathering dust somewhere. And I concentrated just on boys and my studies. And when I went to university, I chose instead of photography, because that was like self-funded and I couldn't pay that. So I chose for history. I'm a master in history and education. And because also those studies were still quite expensive, I started working with my brother, who had an IT company. And I started doing photocopies in those days because it was in the student neighborhood. Then my brother, he was only 2 years older, and he loved to visit the pub. And people came in to buy computers, and I started to sell computers, do some research, and started to learn more about them. And we have been doing that little shop while I was studying for 7 years or 8
Wow.
years. Until then, I got married and I got kids, and it became a bit too much. So I stopped working there. But within 2 years, I started one of the first e-commerces in Belgium. And it was a website called Zappy Baby. Zappy Baby in Dutch, in German, in French. And it was a website where expecting parents could find anything about being pregnant, deliveries, and buy the first baby outfits. Sadly, it was then there was a big bubble, and we cleaned it up nicely, and that was the end of my IT days. In meanwhile, I had 2 kids. Both have autism, so they got diagnosed. Right. In meanwhile, we found that Belgium was not a good area to raise them because there were too many impulses. You were expected to be social, to have your weekends full with friends and meet up, but that was not for our kids. So we actually decided to homeschool them first when we were still living in Belgium, and then we moved to the Caribbean. And there everything was more peaceful and quiet. I could homeschool them. It was perfect. It was really fast in the morning, just 2 hours of teaching, and they were already ahead. And then I got a bit more time and I started diving.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess living in the Caribbean, looking out at all that water, is pretty much right at the top of the list of what you're going to do there, isn't it?
Yeah. And we were living seaside. It was beautiful and I loved snorkeling. But then, of course, I was there and it was, why not diving? Because I saw so many divers on the island, and it was Grand Cayman. So it's really the place where a lot of people from the States come for a little winter break. So I decided to learn to dive and take my husband with me because he used to dive in Belgium. So he was well trained, like for years. And my first dive, it was half an hour, like a discovery dive. And I come up and I said, I really don't like this. And then a Belgian friend said, well, you're never going to like this if you don't buy your own gear, because that's the thing. You're not used to all this thing. You don't know where everything is. So buy your own gear, start doing proper courses and go diving. And that's what I did. I never stopped learning since.
Fantastic. And those first steps into diving, I still remember to this day. Mine were quite some time ago now, but I remember I was very fortunate. I didn't know how lucky I was. I got taken out to the Poor Knights Islands here in New Zealand, which is one of the absolute primo dive spots. And the day just happened to be 35, 40 meter visibility. It was in the late autumn or fall, as they'd say in the States. And I jumped in the water and you could see, in those days we were working in feet. That shows how long ago it was. And yeah, you could see to 100, 120 feet to the bottom. And so we were diving this beautiful wall. And I'd always wanted to dive. It was already a thing for me. But to have that as my experience on my open water course was just staggering. And that was it for me. Only to realize not too long afterwards that diving's not always that cool. And sometimes the visibility is 2 meters, not 30 meters. So obviously, you had this passion for photography that you'd had from a very young age. Then you'd started diving. How did you bring the two of those together?
After my first dives and my certification, I did a lot of the specialties because I didn't feel comfortable underwater yet. But then actually I was quite comfortable, and I started, because I was used to juggling so many things, the homeschooling and taking care of the house and everything. And I was very good in organizing. So I was a bit bored underwater. I said, I just going to buy a camera. I'm going to ask my instructor if my buoyancy is okay. So if I can start taking pictures underwater. And actually it was. And I think I started, then it was after dive 17. And then I contacted Alex Mustard because I didn't know him because I was new to this whole diving and photography world, but he gives workshops on the island every year, 2 weeks. So I contacted him and I said, can I just follow your workshop? And he said, well, you need some experience and you need a fisheye lens and you need good buoyancy and everything. And I went and bought a fisheye lens and kept working on my buoyancy. And I attended that workshop. And I think soon after I started winning little prizes with my photos. And it was something like, it was meant to be a bit. Like you have an eye or you don't have an eye. And I know nothing about gear. I just know I went from a little camera and everybody was laughing with my little camera to selling images the first year. And I was able to buy like a full big on camera, a D800 Nikon, because people always ask.
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds awesome. Actually, I have a friend. He actually did some training with me in Sidemount, but he had been diving for a long, long time. And because of a health issue, he had to stop diving, which is obviously all of us put your hand on your heart and you understand what sort of a tragedy that is to someone who diving is their passion. But he took up photography, and I don't even know whether he was a photographer before this. And he's been taking, obviously, above water photographs of the stars at night and of scenery and so on. And his images are absolutely staggering. And he just wins award after award now. And I think it's become, he's applied as much discipline and as much passion to photography as he did to his diving. And yeah, it is quite amazing when somebody who's got that eye starts to present their images. And clearly you have that.
Yeah, it's a nice outlet also for a lot of things you're dealing with. So the diving and the photography, I could express what I was feeling. So I think for me, it was like perfect. But when you mention health issues, after 11 months of diving, I got an undeserved bend, a type 2 DCS. And I ended up in the chamber 3 times for full treatment. And my right arm was semi-paralyzed for 6 months. And still, when I do macro diving and I have to hold my camera for a long time, it starts shaking. So I went back to diving because everybody says you have to get back into it because otherwise you're going to get scared. And what did you do wrong? You must have done something wrong. But I really didn't. It was a 45-minute dive at 45 feet, so 15 meters. Nothing wrong. But of course, I went back to diving. I didn't feel good the whole time. So I felt worse and worse. And then after a while, they found a PFO in my heart. And they also found a valve that didn't work well. So instead of keeping diving and going deep and going to extremes, I just thought, what can I do? How can I make a difference? And I went to extreme snorkeling. So I went to cold places by myself, and I went to the belugas by myself, rented the boat and took pictures there. And nobody ever imagined that I was not diving anymore. So I found a new challenge. But of course, after a few years, I did the occasional dive still, and I wanted to feel better in my diving. So that's when I decided to, why not just perfection the dive that I don't exert myself? And that's the reason I went to Sidemount.
Interesting.
That's the only
reason. Because a lot of
reason.
people talk about Sidemount diving, and there was a survey that came out following the In-Depth magazine special on Sidemount diving that just came out recently, and Michael Manduno did a survey with his team there. I helped devise some of the questions for it. Part of that was trying to find out what the benefits were. And the number one benefit ended up, although there were many, was access to valves, which obviously with a twin set can be extremely difficult, especially with thick undergarments. So I understand that. But the other one is really carrying gear around. Not everyone's built like an athlete and can necessarily carry gear around. But the other thing is, if you've got any kind of disability or any type of injury, then carrying cylinders and getting them to the water and getting them on, and this ability to don in the water where you have pretty much no weight, especially in benign conditions, is really a massive benefit to Sidemount diving. So yeah, I get that. So let's carry on there on Sidemount diving. So you decided that Sidemount diving would be right for you. Tell us about your experience getting into Sidemount.
Getting into Sidemount was like a journey. I didn't know what to expect. Tech diving is totally different. The courses are different. You don't find a lot. There are materials, but then you have all instructors have a different interpretation about methods and stuff. So a part of the education in technical diving in Sidemount is giving a bit of the control also away in the way you are taught. And that was very difficult for me because I want to know what's going to happen, and I want to know what time are we going to go in the water. I want to know what are we going to do on day 1, on day 2. And it's more courses that are built around you as a person. So I found that a bit difficult. And even like for agencies, I would love that they have it like a nice scenario. And the reason I say that is because not everybody is a young person without commitments, without a family or something. So some of us really have to take serious time off or plan things or communicate with family. And that for me was very frustrating. Like I needed to know more how many days I needed to take off, when I would be out of the water, when I was able to cook, those stupid daily things, because it doesn't stop for a parent or a husband or a wife.
Yeah, 100%. And it's quite interesting. I find here in New Zealand, the way that I run my courses, I very much have to do that. So with what I call my Sidemount Fundamentals course, I have a schedule of day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And the schedule is quite defined as to what we're going to do each day. But I listen to many of my peers and other Sidemount instructors around the world, and many of them are saying exactly what you're saying, which is you really have to mold the course to the student, and it's days of training, and who knows when the end will be. I understand that because not everyone progresses at the same speed. I often find that I've got students that are way ahead of the game and really easy to teach and take to sidemount diving virtually instantly. And then I have students who need quite a bit of work and time to be able to do it. And so therefore they fall behind on the schedule. And so it is quite challenging. I remember talking to Sana Volja. I don't know if you know Sana she's Belgian, and she made a really, she was so cool because she has a structured course, but at the end of the course, she doesn't certify straight away. You have to go away and do some dives for a period of time, let's say. And then you come back and meet with her again. And it's actually, they don't even know it's the certification dive, but they come back to dive with her to basically spend some time with her and be tested against the standards, I guess you would say, for the course. But she makes it really comfortable and gives lots of time and the ability to give people more time if they need it, which I think is really valuable. So I love the way that she does that.
That's a great approach, because if I would have known in the beginning that it's, with some people, it's all about the certification. To me, it was not about the certification. It's about the skills and being a confident diver. So even if it would be 4 days or 6 or 8, it wouldn't matter. If I would known in advance that's the window, or if I would have done like a zillion more dives. So it's just like planning. It's a different way of teaching. It's a different way of preparing. And I also think a part to blame are students. They want the cards. The agencies, they want the money. So it's not, but for me as a user, I would say that's an issue, like a bit of more transparency and all those things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting feedback. I think the other thing that comes into play is money as well. Obviously, the more days of diving, the more money that you need to pay the instructor, and that makes sense. And what I find is you sometimes run into a barrier where, at 4 days, it's this price and people know what they're up for. And here we also have on top of that operator cost, because we need to go out on boats and all that sort of thing. So you've got to pay them, and that becomes quite expensive, especially alongside purchasing equipment. And then to get to the end and say, well, actually, we need another 2 days, another 3 days, and they've got to go back to work on Monday. So it's going to be at some point in the future. And then you have to arrange all of that again. It can be quite challenging. But I do understand what you're saying. And I think it is back to Sana's model, if you like. I think that's a great way to do it. We're going to do 4 days. Your 4 days is going to be structured. You'll be available to go back to your family and back to work on Monday. But we're going to meet up again next month. And in the meantime, you're going to do some diving, and then we'll meet up and we'll do another 2 days or something. So I think that's a great model for that.
It should be like presented as a journey. We're going on a journey, and you never know when it's going to end. And in the end, it doesn't end, because once you get this, the excitement.
Just more experiences along the way. Okay, I don't know if we've jumped over some of the things that you did in the Caribbean, because I'm really interested in some of the photography that you've done. We might come back to sidemount diving in a moment. I think it started with sharks in Cayman, and I know you met up with Christina Zanato and started to work with sharks a little bit. Tell us about that experience.
I started in the Caribbean. I was very lucky. My first summer, I was in the middle of silver sites, which is also the images I think that are most published. And I was happy with silver sites and bigger fish, tarpon, and the stingrays we have. And I looked at the Caribbean as my backyard for practice. I was able to just go in the water and practice different techniques and get better. And then there was a workshop in the Bahamas, Cat Island, I think. And that was with Amanda Cotton. And I knew her name, so I just said, yes, I'm going to do that. Didn't realize it was with sharks, but it was with oceanic whitetips. I did see sharks before, Caribbean reef sharks, but they're very skittish. And then I went on a boat with Amanda Cotton and I think 10 other divers. And the thing that scares me the most at that point were the other people, not the sharks. So if other people are not calm, I need my calm on a boat, and I need to find my calm before a dive. And the whole adrenaline dives, I didn't like. So I regrouped myself and I just talked about it. I always, I talk about the issues I have. And then I got in with very confident divers with sharks. And then that fear was gone. Next step was diving with sharks, and then also trying to shark yourself, thinking like a shark, because then I could take better images. So we started to do a photography documentary about the similarities of communication with animals, specifically sharks, and the communication with autistic people. Because my kids are high functioning autistic, and it's all the same. It's very clear instructions, very calm, things you can't misinterpret. So no misunderstandings. And that was the reason we went to Christina and we filmed that. It was an amazing experience to shark yourself and to really concentrate on this one shark and this one action, and also the message then that you can give to other people about they're dangerous. They can be dangerous. Don't get me wrong. And I need to say that in different words. I think if you do your research about every species of shark that you're going to dive with before you're going to dive, there is hardly any danger. But on the course with Christina, I did have chainmail, because if I make a mistake and the shark would bite me, the shark gets blamed. So that's also a message. You don't want a shark to be blamed because it's vilified enough. But if I could do it, anybody could do it. That was a bit of the message. I've been a housewife for so long. So it was this, I think even the working title of the documentary was Desperate Shark Wife, which Christina did not find funny at all. So we had to change the working title. And she was right. But in the end, the message I could give to other people was like, this is a very serene environment if you know what you're doing. And just inform yourself. And before you get into the ocean, that it is indeed their realm. And be informed. Like with any species.
Yeah. I had a great interview with Christina way back. I think it was episode 33, and we talked about sharks, and I related my experience because I'm a little older, but I got into diving in the 70s, and Jaws had only just come out when I started diving, and we were all terrified of sharks following that movie. And of course, then they dredged up, and I didn't even realize at the time, a guy in Australia, Rodney Fox, who's quite famous now as a shark conservationist, but he was attacked by a great white. And I didn't realize it seemed like it was just before Jaws it had happened, but it had actually happened 10 years previous in the 60s. So it was a long time before that. And he was attacked and was very fortunate to survive. And for a while, it was when those damn bang sticks came out. So everyone was out killing sharks, and because they were dangerous, and it was just a terrible, terrible time. And, it was quite funny. My stepfather and I carried one in the water here when we were diving. We never saw a shark. So it was just this paranoia and craziness around sharks. And of course, I said to Christina, like, my philosophy is you've got more chance of being run over by a yellow bus on a Thursday than you have of being attacked by a shark. So it's almost non-existent. And particularly if you enter their environment, you need to understand it's their environment, not yours, firstly. And then secondly, if you start to employ some of the discipline that you're talking about, which is understanding the shark, understanding what triggers it. And I think one of my things is don't look like prey, especially with the bigger sharks. Make sure that you're not on the surface, you're not flapping around looking like an injured seal, for instance. So the net of it was we had a wonderful conversation. And she even talked about the chainmail and why she wore it. And it wasn't so much that she felt that the sharks were particularly dangerous to her. It was exactly what you said. It was more from the fact that if there was a mistake or an accident, it wasn't the shark's fault. She needed to protect herself. And I'm sure you were doing the same thing.
Yeah, if you take pictures of sharks, and I have lots of photographers I know, of course, they all want the mouth open and the teeth. But more and more, years ago, it started show the serenity, because the mouth open is only when they are feeding. So why not show them in their natural environment and make people fall in love with them, or at least respect them for keeping the reefs clean and everything. It's an attitude. And regarding that attitude, I won a bit of awards, and I was asked by the United Nations to be the curator for the photo competition. And I designed 14 ethical statements that photographers need to comply with, because I think just being a photographer at this time in what's happening around the world and with nature and climate change, you cannot not tell a story anymore. I think you need, with a picture, you need the bigger picture. You need to tell the stories and help people understand what is happening. And that's also a part of when I'm on a dive boat with other divers and they go yelling in the water and flapping on the water at the surface and it's a shark dive, I tell myself and I tell the operator, this is not okay practice. And maybe some people hate me for it, but I don't care, because I'm not like affiliated with anybody or with an organization or with an operator or with anything. So you can speak up.
And I think you're 100% right. And my experience in that too, my kids tell me this all the time. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, Dad. And so if I ever have a challenge with them or a conflict, it's always generally about what I've said and how I've said it. But your message is 100% spot on. Is you're crazy if you're getting into a shark feeding dive or a shark dive and you're doing things that make you look like prey. That's the last thing that you want to do, right? Because again, it's not the shark's fault. If you're doing that, you've entered their environment and now you're looking like something that you shouldn't. And I love the conservation angle as well. I mean, obviously we're in a very, very difficult time in human history right now with the issues that we have. Not only do we have climate change, but we have massive pollution problems and other aspects of that. And some of it seems to be so insurmountable to us now, because I just don't feel like we can get our shit together well enough to be able to deal with some of this. But I was watching an interview with you and you talked about having a voice in conservation, and you also talked about constructive solutions. So what sort of things are you thinking about when you say that?
It's about, we all go to dive shows, now a bit less because of the pandemic, and also because I don't want to, for example, I get invited to a lot of shows, but I think we all need to start with ourselves. So if I would fly just for 3 days to a show in Australia and come back, what kind of message do I give that it's okay to fly just for the 3 days for my ego, to pimp my ego and to be able to post, I'm giving a talk there. So I'm not doing that. I try to combine things. I try to choose, if I go to certain events, it has to be close by, or I have to combine it with a different trip, but I will not fly anymore. And that was, it's already like 3 or 4 years that I really tried to do that. Also, when I go to an event, just even a private event, I take my reusable water bottle. And I think also if there's no glass somewhere, I will not drink water. I will go to the tap and drink. So I think we start with ourselves, because we are otherwise preaching, and preaching is never good. But if you give the right example, then people can follow your example. So I think if you're in a position where people watch you, you have to lead by example. And you cannot make an exception, and you cannot be a hypocrite. You have to be genuine. And if you're genuine, I do believe that people will have more respect and listen to you. I try to do that when I do school talks. I try to do that when I give, because now I live in England and most of my presentations are in England, because that's where.
Easy.
Also, and also the diving. I'm not going to go to Indonesia when there's so many macro divers going there taking pictures of nudie pranks, and then I will go to England and document things that I want to document here. Easy accessible. And my plan was also before the pandemic to move to England and to just show the people living here how beautiful their coast is. And then during the pandemic, a lot of British divers got into UK diving, but now the borders are open again and everybody goes back to the Red Sea. So it's a bit like appreciate what you have close by, because it can be gone tomorrow if you don't take care of it. That's my motto.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess by doing that, you're actually helping to raise awareness amongst those who are not able to go to those sort of places.
Yeah.
It leads to, I want to chat a bit more about Yucatan later on, but that's one of the big drivers there, is giving people information and giving them visuals, because visuals work really well for us, I think, in terms of video and photography of what is happening and what the impact is of various activities that we do. So that sounds great. And I like the aspect that you mentioned about long flights and making sure that they count if you're going to do them.
Yeah.
And certainly from this part of the world, we've always had to do that almost from an economic point of view. If we're going to travel to Europe, you can't go for 3 days. It's 1 day's a flight and 1 day's a flight back. So you have to go for longer. But building in there conservation angle of understanding that you're burning hydrocarbons to get there, and that's going to have an impact, and trying to offset that somehow is another way you can do that too. A lot of the airlines enable you to buy carbon credits, if you like, to pay for that, and hopefully they're using that wisely. We talked about the sharks, and you talked about snorkeling too. I noticed also that you'd done some work in the Arctic with polar bears, which just looked staggering to me. Got nothing to do with diving. This is more interest for me because I love polar bears. So tell us a bit about how that experience went and what you did there.
It's like totally getting out of your comfort zone. But again, do your research, know that you have to stay safe. It's not about the picture. To me, I never have expectations. I'm always happy if I get a picture, but I'm there for the experience, and I'm there to tell the story. I want to observe them. And if I come home with a picture, I'm happy. But with the polar bears and the Arctic, it's a totally different experience than Antarctica, where you have lots of animals, lots of wildlife. Arctic is a wilderness. So we got on snow scooters with our own supplies. Your camera is not the priority. The priority is the fuel for the snow scooters, and the priority is your safety gear and the food, like the astronaut food, those things. And then if there's room left, you can take your camera and you have to stay warm. That's a skill. There's so many skills in a different environment, but I do think if you want to experience those kind of encounters, you need a lot of patience, and you need to also know that it's not a given, and you need to just be grateful to be there. And if you're like that, I do believe good karma comes your way and you get some nice shots.
For sure.
I've been to orcas too with snorkeling. One time I had no shot to belugas. 1 year I had nothing. The next year I thought about it, and I was not lucky. The visibility was still shit, but I had a plan. So, and you have a plan, plan B, and you know the animals better. So yeah, it's all about.
Amazing.
And I love those environments, but I have huge respect, because actually I was afraid of water.
Yeah, and that's not unusual either. I've had guests on the show before. One guy came on, he didn't even know how to swim, but he wanted to be a diver. So he had to learn how to swim, overcome his fear of the water, become a swimmer before he could become a diver. So that's actually incredibly common. And in fact, I'm sure some of the world's greatest divers are in that boat of starting out that way and then eventually building confidence and becoming great. So let's move on a little bit to side mount diving. So you talked about the training and you gained the skill, and you mentioned the reason for that was because of a weakness in your arm following your DCS incident, which I completely understand. How did you then use side mount diving to further your photography and also the diving that you were doing?
Side mount, actually, quite quickly after the side mount followed my cave course, because I wanted to take images in the caverns, and I wanted to be not an ignorant diver, but I wanted to be a safe diver in the caverns even. But instead of doing cavern course, I ended up doing my cave 1 and cave 2 course, because I wanted to tell the stories about the aquifers and how they are being abused and the pollution we see there. So in order to be able to tell that story, I needed to be in that environment. And that's actually the reason I got into it. And then in a way, I try to capture that environment, but the photography is not my main focus anymore. It's more the exploration, because then I met Robbie and he took me to some amazing places, and we just didn't think about the camera, but it really got me hooked on exploration. And there's other people that live actually in the Yucatan and that are amazing photographers. So why would I reinvent the warm water if other people can document it and I can talk about it and tell the stories in the places I'm invited? That was more the focus then. Because it is a very sad story, these aquifers, how they are being pumped and sold, and the dangers for, like, in where I don't remember where it was, the extreme drafts we're experimenting, and then the aquifers that are empty. It's just horrible. And my UN boss, I call him my boss, but he's not really my boss because it's a volunteering thing that I do for 10 years now. No, 8 years, always half a year. His wife is from the Yucatan, so he's very supportive of me telling that story, which is also nice to be able to bring different angles in and different networks to make connections happen. So actually we can move and shake and get better protection in place. That's a bit what I do.
So much to unpack in there. I mean, I first came across the Shouldn't project when I spoke to Tamara May, a long time ago, and it was a great interview I did with her, and it was just preceding the pandemic. So, as you'd be very well aware, the project was supposed to happen, I think, in 19 or 20 and didn't come about because of the pandemic. And Tamara was so excited about it. And so it was a great interview with her. And then of course, it happened. And I was able to catch up with Ramba Yermanson and talk about her experience of going through that. And I loved it from just about every perspective. There was Robbie mentoring you guys. There was also the fact that it was an all-female team, which in itself is obviously very different and not, in my experience, done before. Not that there needs to be any male versus female here. I think it was just great to see that happen. And then being able to talk to Robbie about it and his experience and the reason that he did that in the episode I did with him. And one thing that really surprised me about Robbie in that instance is I knew he was a great cave explorer and had laid a lot of line and all those sorts of things. But I just didn't understand the depth of knowledge that he had around the science and the geology of the cave systems and how they ran and how he had these theories that he was trying to verify or dispel. And this project was part of that. This Shunanha, he had this area and he had a theory about it. And then he pulled you guys together and basically helped you through the process. But then, of course, you guys were the ones in the water. So tell us about the experience of meeting Robbie, going on the project and working with these other amazing divers.
It was a truly exceptional experience from the time we talked about it until the time it actually came to fruition, because he mentored us, and also he got a lot of backlash because it was an all-female expedition and it was, what is Robbie doing there? And even most of the backlash came from women, which was not really nice because it wasn't about the women, it was about the divers. But also, you have to have a bit of marketing about it. So you have to be smart about projects you want to do, because otherwise they don't happen. And he just didn't care what people said. So he brought us together, and amazing work already in going to look for the perfect sites that he would think that would bring us far. But of course, there was no guarantee. And the first day we get to the jungle, and it was really far, far into the jungle. And there was one swampy place, but it was not a swamp yet. And then there was one beautiful cenote with rocks and dry places and beautiful blue water. And of course, it's easier for the rebreather divers to have those rocks and a bit of dry stuff. So me and Julia Gugelmeyer, who is an amazing cave diver, we said, we will do the swamp, whatever. But we're the two oldest team members, I think. But yeah, it didn't matter. I also, because of the pandemic and because it was postponed, I had major surgery on a diastase 4.5 months before. So I was not at my strongest. But the team, like Julia, she's a real team player. And that's what I take away from that expedition. As women, I've never experienced 6 women with not any drama, but being such team players during the whole expedition. And also Robbie, there were a lot of things that went wrong, where he was like a rock, and we all came together and we all supported each other. And like, it was not the easiest expedition, but it was truly one that makes my heart still warm until now. And I hope I can go back, but not like for a week or something, but for 3 weeks, a month and a half, and just do more of that.
Yeah, Mexico really sucks you in that way, doesn't it? And I know a lot of the people that were on, now that I've met you as well. I think the only woman I haven't met now is Melody. And knowing each of the individuals and then knowing how that would all come together, the level of diving in there is really very, very strong.
There's a big variety.
I met Julia, actually was at dinner with her several times when I was there last November and didn't have the privilege of diving with her. And I've met Maria in Australia. Again, haven't dived with her, but just such a good group of people. And of course, Robbie made the point, look, it's eye-catching, right? You're all pretty photogenic.
I don't know about that. Yeah. Not the rest of the group, but yeah.
No, come on. I think in this social media era where you do want to capture people's attention, and then, I mean, I can't think of why anyone would be opposed to that. If you want to go and do your own project, go and do your own project. You know, it's kind of let people do what they want to do. And I thought you guys did an amazing job. I love listening to Ramba's story about the discovery that they made and the connection that her and Maria made. She did say that you guys courageously took the swamp. That was awesome in itself.
It was just amazing. And I think it was a lot of no nonsense and there was no attitude and we had no expectations. But in the end, if you put together the line we put in, it was pretty impressive. Like me and Julia and then Tamara, she pushed it a bit further with Henri Breeder. But it was also not, oh no, this is our cave. No, come and push it further because we think this goes. And Julia, to be in the water with Julia, because I did some cavern dives with her when I was there a few years earlier. But to buddy up with her was the best experience, I think, in my diving life. We had this understanding without words. I'm a newer cave diver and she's super experienced, but I did what I was good at, stay on the line. When she just took a little look to see if something would go, like just the calm we had together and how we dealt with problems and how she saw where she needed to go because she can read those caves. I wouldn't say like Robbie yet because he smells and reads the caves, but Julia, she reads the caves in a beautiful way and she really helped me to make the most of the experience and I will never forget that.
Yeah. You talked about going back. What sorts of things would you like to do when you go back?
I would just love to explore more caves. And maybe in a few years do some more photography in the caves. But I think I think you need to be able to read caves pretty good to take decent photographs because otherwise you just why take another one that somebody else can take a better one. So it's really not for me the ego. I had one image. One of the few images I took in a cave was on a dive with Robbie to Yapium, one of those epic names that's about. No, it was not in Yapium, it was in Dos Pisos. So I needed to take a picture of Robbie with the Explorers Club flag, and he wanted to do that in Dos Pisos. And I don't like stage shots in a cave with lights set up because I don't know the caves well enough. So I have the shot of him with the flag, but I was also following him on the dive into, and I saw him with his lights in front going into this beautiful room. I really speeded up, got a frame, got a shot, and that won a few awards. And that allows me then again to talk about amazing environment. So the link with photography and conservation for me is the most important, but not like the pictures to just know I took a beautiful picture. It's more about the ability to talk about it.
Yeah, well, let's do that, given that you've segued us into this. So let's talk about conservation. And I mean, obviously this is specific to Yucatan, but I think the same thing applies to other aquifers and other places around the world. And one of the big challenges from my point of view is out of sight, out of mind. It's been the issue with the ocean for a long time. It's why we've used the ocean as our garbage dump, is because once it's underwater, the vast majority of humans will never see it again, unless it happens to surface and wash up on a beach somewhere, which does happen, of course. But with aquifers, there's the double whammy, if you like, or double effect of the fact that it's also our water supply. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on protection of aquifers and what the challenges are right now for us.
I think the biggest challenge is that, for example, Florida and Mexico or the Yucatan, for most divers, it's that's cave country, and they don't really want to know what's going on. And I think it's the biggest challenge in conservation with Arctic, like everywhere, climate change. People don't want to hear the bad news anymore because we've been whacked with it for so long. And a few years ago, there was this trend showing the bad stuff. And everybody would say, oh, that's horrible. And then people started to be active. But it's just the diving world that's then active to protect this particular cave and this particular dive site. And that's not enough. So what I love to do is use my Rolodex, my connections I have from different parts in my life, and bring people together that can actually make a change. That's my perspective, because I do believe us as divers, we can be vocal, but shouting doesn't help. You have to be looking for solutions like blue economies, responsible diving then at the places where you go, that leave it in a better way, but think constructive. Don't go blaming, for example, the owner of a cenote that he doesn't do enough. It's their livelihood. They take care of their farm, but it's also not the most wealthy people. So you can understand that they're not the people making big changes. So I think what we have to do is be respectful towards the environment and think towards solutions and bring in, not for the solutions, not people that are going to say what they have to do there, but connect them with people that can actually be the change in their country, because otherwise it's never going to work. You cannot go as a non-native there and tell them how they need to do it, because there's always different sides and different challenges. It's never black and white, and you need to be able to compromise. I think that's needed, because in the diving world and in conservation, people shout too much and then nothing happens.
Yeah, really good point. And it is challenging, isn't it? Because when we come from, well, let's call it the Western or first world or whatever, and we go into countries, and I'm not saying they're third world, but obviously that aren't as developed and are still developing. We did all these things 100 years ago and destroyed most of our aquifers back then, right?
Yeah.
So we've been through the same path that they have, and then going there and holding them to a higher standard when their standard of living is not very high. And as you say, all they're doing is trying to survive and trying to look after their families. Then to come to them and say, listen, you guys need to be doing this, especially if it's going to cost them a lot of money. It's a real problem. And I think when you look at the Yucatan area and the amount of development that has happened there from Cancun all the way south of Tulum now, and the amount of growth. I mean, I first went there in 2013, and that's when I did my cave training. And to see the change from 2013 to 2022 when I went back was absolutely dramatic. And then to see that some of the caves were actually closed now because they're no longer safe to dive because the bacterial levels have become so high is just really sad. And we've got to find a way to help. And I have already done an episode with Alessandra Pagari talking a little bit about this and about Tren Maya and about what we're trying to do. I've also done an episode on Somos Los Cenotes, where a group of amazing cave divers have come together to basically produce video content that really shows what is below the water. I talked to Robbie about this too, about what can we do, and he talked a lot about that, about let's make this visual for people. Let's take photographs, let's take video and show them what's below there and then explain why it's important. And then, as you say, we've got to find a way to help them find solutions. I think the development is really a lot of the issue is, how fast everything's happening. How can the infrastructure keep up with that? How can we make sure that the freshwater systems and sewage systems and so on are built in such a way that they protect the aquifers? And then also help them develop their economies. I mean, the Tren Maya, I absolutely understand why they want to build a train from Cancun down to Tulum. That makes sense. It's where it's going that's the problem. And of course, there's all these competing interests, and Stratis Kas is introducing me to a bunch of people who I might talk to about that. And so I've got some episodes, I hope, coming up where we can talk about Tren Maya in detail and what's going on in the Yucatan and see if we can't help expose it to a wider audience and drive some change or drive some solutions to the problems.
And it's the best thing to talk with the local people. And even Robbie, he's been there. Like, to me, he's a local. And when you see, because we're all keyboard warriors and we like to shout when we see something, but the first thing I do is check with the people that actually live there and the people that are involved. And then I check with them, and then sometimes they say, well, do not share that thing because that's not going to do good to the cause. And I think it's very important, because when people are working so hard to preserve things and you, without knowledge, are starting to actually insult some people, it doesn't help the cause. So sometimes it's good to inform yourself and be not silent, but share like valid information. But that's like a sign of the times these days. We're just too quick to judge.
Exactly. And talk's cheap, isn't it? It's easy to say, it's easy to shout, it's easy to point at what's wrong, but finding the solutions and finding ways you can help drive solutions is really the answer. So I'm actually personally quite negative about climate change at the moment, only because I just don't see us at a government level being able to coordinate ourselves well enough to be able to make real change. Funny enough, everyone's afraid of AI now, and I'm running off on a real tangent here, but I wonder whether technology isn't going to be our savior at some point in the future. There are some amazing projects such as the Pacific Garbage Patch Cleanup that's being overcome through technology, and I wonder whether AI may come to our rescue in many, many different ways in terms of supporting climate change, because I just, governments, oh my God, trying to get us to agree and to hold ourselves to our agreements that we've already made at the United Nations is incredibly challenging, especially when we have most countries are going through difficult economic times following the pandemic. So it only makes it harder for us. So as I said, I'm a little bit negative, but trying to be positive at the same time, because I think we can do it.
Yeah. I need to talk and give people hope, but sometimes I don't see a solution. But if we give up hope, then everybody just does what they want to do and say, oh, there's no use. And I've lived on a beach for 12 years, and I can really assure you in the end, because every day I did a beach cleanup with my dog. Well, he was not carrying anything. I was, but in the beginning,
he was keeping you company and being there for moral support.
Yeah. But in the beginning, it was like 2 buckets a day. And by the end, I could not keep up. And I was just getting depressed because it was not just big pieces of plastic. It was like all the small styrofoam. And it was horrible. It really got me depressed. And one of the first things that I experienced moving to England was, a green, lush environment. I don't need to be confronted with the plastic every day. And I needed that because working in conservation, it can really bring you down. And that's the last thing you need. But it is like a very depressing story. And the things I do most, the stories I tell the most are the Arctic story, like the ice and animals needing the ice to breathe and animals needing the ice to feed. So the seals, the harp seals and polar bears, because that's the most visual you can go. But I show the beauty and then I tell the really sad story. And then people just go like, okay, what can we do? And then they start taking care a bit of the plastic. But it's, if everybody would do their own little bit, that's a big bit.
Yeah.
Governments, I don't think we have to rely on governments.
No. Well, we've made some changes here. I'm sure this change is quite common around the world. I mean, plastic bags in supermarkets, for instance, have been banned. We're making some progress, but it drives me crazy. I run a coffee shop and we have a conservation program we run there where everything that leaves the shop is either compostable or recyclable. But we do use takeaway cups, but they're compostable and they go in a compost bin that then goes to a commercial composting facility and is used on gardens. In one sense, it's like, geez, these takeaway cups are really not good. They're not terrible because they can be composted. So we've come up with a solution for that. And then we sell literally hundreds of keep cups now. I don't have one with me. Normally I do. So we have these reusable double-walled stainless cups that we have. And we sell, I think we're on 500 now. So it's just a staggering number of these that come through now. So these are just little things that you talked about before that we can do. The composting and recycling, not using plastics where you can. Oh, where I was going with the compostable cups, they get them delivered to us and they come in a plastic sleeve.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy. And then you sort of look at it and go, oh, I understand why that's in a plastic sleeve. If they weren't, they probably would be damaged. And plastics are so prolific because they're so damn useful. Yeah. This is the problem. It's such a good solution to the problem. The trouble is the downstream effects of what we've done are terrible. So, yeah, we've just got to get better and better. And things like, I don't know whether electric vehicles are a big thing here now as well. And that's starting to become more and more. We have a lot of renewable electricity generation in New Zealand through hydro, a little bit through wind and geothermal as well. Things are happening at the macro government level, but I think you pointed out earlier what we do ourselves in our daily lives really does count. And even things like reducing your power consumption.
To me, it's very confronting that in this dive world that we live in, so for us, I'm a diver, you're a diver, that a lot of the divers are still ignorant. And that's the thing that I want to address. So I think we don't, because we're so privileged to witness what's going on. We have the beauty that we can see in the ocean and we see the things that go wrong. And if we are not like aware users and reusers of things, how can we expect people living in a city and not being these privileged witnesses to the blue to behave or to take it into account and to reuse everything and think about how they consume. So I think we should be all ocean ambassadors and the best ocean ambassadors and tell the story and not preach to people that are not divers, but make them more aware. That's a thing we can do, but with kindness. And if people don't want to follow, don't judge or don't.
I don't know about you. I think things are improving in the dive circles. I know you've talked about the haters a lot and the people who perhaps post negative messages. I'm seeing less and less of that, and I don't know whether I've insulated myself from it. It's a funny thing. When I started speaking Sidemount, I so expected to get jumped on and to have some very negative outcomes, and I have had next to zero of that. I don't tolerate that very well. You know, if someone does have a crack at me, it hasn't never been about diving. It's been about other things, notably about climate change. Because if you're a climate denier, I can't shut up when somebody is that, I'm going to say, dumb. That sets me off. I need to take a lesson from you and not be a shouter, because that sort of thing drives me absolutely crazy. The evidence is so overwhelming now. And if you read the climate change report from the UN organization that does that, I forget the initials for it, but I read the summary of it the other day, and the first 15 paragraphs have unequivocal in each paragraph, unequivocally caused by humans, unequivocally caused by what we've done. So I think no doubt it is unequivocal that we've caused this. I haven't really noticed very much of this anymore in diving, at least. So I don't know if that's your experience, and I hope that continues. And I really think that those of us who have a voice should really be a voice for getting rid of negativity, being supportive of each other, being positive. And one thing I've always noticed is a little bit of jealousy. You're a great diver. I want to be a great diver. I'm jealous of you. We should be celebrating each other, and we should be saying, hey, you can be good, but I can be good too, and bringing each other up together. I don't know, my 10 cents on that. I don't know what your perspective is right now and whether you're seeing it improving over what it has been.
I'm not as active on social media anymore because I had some challenges the past years. I relocated in the pandemic, an overseas relocation in a divorce, and I got a new partner, and he sadly took his own life.
Oh my God.
So it does place everything in perspective.
Yes.
And I needed to protect myself from negativity, and that's what I've done. So I think my toleration for, like you said, deniers, I think it became less if I would see it, because I don't take shit anymore. I'm more like keeping my strength. But yeah, so I've been away from social media a bit. And if I express myself, it's just my genuine me, and I get very bad reactions on it, and I couldn't care less. That's the block. Bye-bye. I can't be bothered about those things anymore. And the negativity, it doesn't affect me like it used to do, because there's other things, and I choose my battles wisely.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing we need to look at, sometimes we over accentuate the negativity and underestimate the positivity.
Yeah.
So for instance, you post a video to YouTube, there's a really good example, and 2 people out of 2,000 didn't like it.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on the 9,998 who loved it, you focus on the 2 who did not. What didn't you like about that? It's crazy, the human psyche, I guess, of how we take that so personally, and focus on the support is what I would say to people. Focus on the people who have your back.
Yeah, and also I think in the dive industry too, you find your niche and you find your tribe, your vibe, your tribe. And for example, I was at Diving Talks in Lisbon the past weekend, and I like Garrett Locke, the Simon Mitchell, those are the people. Pete Mesley, they're there. It's part of my family, I think, those people, because you meet them at places, and I do respect them a lot. And if those people are okay with the things you say and the things you do, that is what matters. It's not a few people you don't know and a few keyboard warriors. And that is actually what does lift me up. And I've experienced the past years a lot of kindness, and also when you brush away the negativity, what I do believe in the goodness of people a lot, and I do believe in kindness, and I do believe in, I'm super grateful for anything that's still in my path. So
yeah, Simon, I know Simon not super well, but I know him pretty well. He was in the Navy, and he actually jumped on the ship that I left just as I ended my naval career. So we have a crossed background, and I've done an episode with him and met him a few times. And I remember the first time I met Simon, we were introduced through Pete. We sat down and talked for 2.5 hours, and it was like we were talking for 5 minutes. It was just flowed because we had this common background, and of course he's such an intelligent man, and so
passionate.
So knowledgeable.
He's knowledgeable, and he's funny.
So he is a funny guy. He's a great speaker too.
People that are great speakers, and then in the end you can also just have a fun conversation and chill, and I do like that.
Yeah, more of that. Just to carry that on one more time, I was in Mexico last year. I spent 3 weeks training with Patrick Whitman and hanging out with the team at ProTech. But I got the opportunity to meet a lot of other people there as well. Natalie Gibb, ran into Jill Heinef and Brian Kaycook while I was there. Also had dinner with Alessandra and her partner and met Julia. And it was just, every interaction was amazing, and sometimes you knew them through other ways. But as I said, I'm so positive about the dive community right now because I just think we're getting better and better at supporting each other. And I think that's one of the things we should focus on. So,
and also in like the Sidemount community, what I experienced the moment I started diving with other people, like when you're certified and cave certified and you start diving with other people, then that's where the support for me really started. Like I've had amazing experiences with Lenny and Claire Vogel. They've been super kind to me in helping me out with little things, and Julia and Tom and Tamara. It's really then people coming together to lift you up. And that's what I like. Yeah. But you have to start somewhere. Yeah.
All right. So I want to segue off into a couple of different directions and ask you questions. This may or may not go somewhere, but you're from Belgium, and I did 2 great episodes with David De Bruin and also with Sannevolia, and they talked about the mines in Belgium, and we're talking about diving caves. Have you dived the mines in Belgium and Germany?
No, it's on my radar. I would love to do it because I go back to Belgium to see my mom. But I think in a year or something, I would definitely go there and try to hook up with them and do some dives there.
Yeah, if I get to Europe and want to do the miles, as you say. And then the last thing was Dive Talks. So Dive Talks was in Portugal recently. It looked like just such a phenomenal lineup of speakers, and what has never been there myself, but I only hear great things about Portugal itself for diving and as a location. Tell us a bit about your experience at Dive Talks.
I was in Portugal to dive Madeira last year, but that was too soon after the passing of my fiance because I did the dive there and I couldn't read my dive computer. So that's how distressed I was. And that's also, I think sharing your weaknesses contributes to the strength of your team. So I will always be very honest about what I felt. So I went to Madeira to photograph monk seals. It didn't happen because I was not in a good state to dive. So I just went on a sailing trip. It was the most beautiful sailing trip I ever had. So Madeira is an island a part of Portugal. And then this year I went with Arlindo, the organizer of diving talks, and Jonathan and Christine Bird and their kids to the Azores for some diving there, which is totally different diving than I did before because it's all about the geology. Like the formations are amazing underwater. And it really was good to get back into this regular diving. Like I did every day a few. It was cold but not too cold. It was challenging but not too challenging, and I loved it. And then Arlindo, he's so passionate about the diving in Portugal, so he started I think 3 years ago, before the pandemic. I think was the first edition of Diving Talks with an amazing lineup too. I think Christina was part of the speakers, and then last year I was part of the speakers with local people, local organizations, and then from the world, the most knowledgeable in their area. But Arlindo directs a bit what you're going to talk about, so it makes a nice panel in the end. So it's very well directed. The talks are 20 minutes long, so you wouldn't get bored. It's very diverse, and then it all connects together. And the whole concept is also that everybody sits down because there's no 4 stages. There's one stage. When there's a break, everybody's on the break. When there's a dinner, everybody goes to the Saturday dinner. When Diving Talks is done, you're part of a family. So it's one of the best concepts. Yeah, I think it's the best one. I really like it.
Awesome. I'll have to make sure I get there sometime.
Have to make sure you're invited as a speaker, because that would be
cool. Wouldn't that be amazing? Well, now that we've done so much promotion for them, maybe that would be amazing. Yeah, I'd love it. Look, it's been brilliant catching up. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think we should?
I think, if you're unsure about your diving, invest in some dive training. Instead of, like a photographer for me, instead of investing in gear and instead of investing in trips, I like to invest in my skills because that's my life. I have 2 children that I want to grow very old to be there for them. So I think investing in dive training is one of the best investments as a diver instead of investing in
Brilliant.
trips.
Yeah, I would second that. And it's good to be role models in that as well.
Be role models, talk about the difficulties. I'm vertically challenged. I'm not a tall person, and I openly talk about how difficult some things are for me. So, and then sometimes other people help me with a simple solution because a tall guy or a tall woman can't think about it. So it's all about sharing and not making each other's life more difficult, but more easy. Yeah.
Love it. Well, it's been amazing to meet you, Ellen, and I hope we get to meet in person, and let's go for a dive when we do that. And again,
platypus is still on my list.
Platypus?
Yes.
Yeah, duckbill platypus, Australia. I'm actually going to Queensland next month to teach a course there, so I'm super excited about that.
If I ever would travel that far, I would combine it with Australia, and then I come and visit you. And Tasmania is something I would do like a long trip. Yeah.
Let's do that, and we'll see if we can get Pete Mesley and Simon actually would come too. We'll get them all, and we'll go for a dive. That would be brilliant.
Cool. No, it was wonderful talking to you. Very relaxed. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ellen.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. It was amazing to meet and talk with Ellen about her work, her diving, and yes, the many challenges that she's faced. And one thing that stays with me at the end of that conversation is just the amazing positive attitude and outlook that she has. It's a real lesson to all of us and a testament to Ellen herself personally. Thanks again to XDeep for sponsoring the show. Thanks so much to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount who every month support the show. And thank you to you for listening. I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast and would like to support the show, then why not become a patron of Speaking Sidemount? For as little as $5 per month, you can become a part of the Speaking Sidemount team, get exclusive early access to all of the episodes, and help us to deliver the very best sidemount, cave, and technical dive content available. Just go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount for all of the details. The address is also on our Facebook page, listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.